It happened in broad daylight, on a busy street, in one of the most heavily watched cities in America. 2 people, gone. No warning. No escape. A man was arrested within the hour. But the questions, those are still echoing. He didn't run. He didn't hide. And when they asked him why, his answer stopped the room cold. But this case is not what it seems. Not at first. Not even now. This is the story of a man who believed he was fighting for something bigger than himself. A message, he said. A cause. But what he left behind were 2 lives silenced. And a city asking how no one saw it coming. We won't start with the crime. Not yet. Because to understand what happened that day, you have to know who they were, who he was, and what no one was willing to say out loud until it was too late. There's a reason this case made national headlines, and why some people still refuse to talk about it. A young couple, a public execution, a political motive, or maybe something else entirely. Stay with us. This is Bullets in Broad Daylight, the Elias Rodriguez case. Before the headlines, before the sirens, before their names were read aloud in a courtroom, they were just 2 people. 2 orbits slowly moving toward each other, each carrying a different story, a different world, and somehow finding home in one another. Sarah Milgram was born just outside Alexandria, the youngest of 3. Her father was a teacher. Her mother worked in healthcare. She was the one who stayed up late with the light under the door, reading about places far beyond her own. By 16, she'd memorized the flags of the world. By 18, she was fluent in Arabic and applying to Georgetown's School of Foreign Service. She believed in diplomacy the way some people believe in prayer, as a kind of faith. Faith that words mattered. That proximity changed people. That presence could prevent war. Her first post-grad job was right where she'd always dreamed, the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. Not as a diplomat. Not yet. But close. Close enough to observe. To learn. To help. Yaron Lishchinsky's path couldn't have been more different. Born in Tel Aviv. Served his required military time, then stayed on longer than most. Not in combat but intelligence. The quiet side of things. Strategy. Languages. Quiet persuasion. He was fluent in English, French, Arabic, and in a kind of cultural fluency that made him stand out. He entered the Foreign Service with purpose. He wasn't a believer in war, not in the abstract. But in its reality, he understood it. He'd seen enough to know the cost. They met, not dramatically. Not at a protest or debate or high-level event. But at the office coffee station. 2 people, different languages, different histories. Bonding over bitter espresso and late-night shift work. They started slowly. Lunches. Shared notes. Quiet conversations behind closed doors. Sarah was cautious. Yaron was patient. Their connection grew not in grand gestures, but in the quiet belief that the other person got it. Got the stakes. Got the risk. Got the hope. To their friends, they were the couple that balanced each other. Sarah's idealism, Yaron's pragmatism. Her fire. His calm. But both held the same compass. They weren't flashy. They weren't loud. But the people around them spoke of their plans like inevitabilities. A wedding. A house. Maybe, someday, a posting abroad, together. One friend described them like this. They were a quiet kind of gravity. When they were in the room, everything else settled. There was talk of a proposal. She'd started dropping hints. He'd asked a friend about ring sizes. They had tickets to a film festival that weekend. Dinner reservations. A gift still wrapped on the kitchen counter. And then, a Thursday. An ordinary Thursday. They didn't know the danger. Didn't see it coming. Didn't realize that just a few blocks away, someone else was waiting. Watching. Deciding. Sarah Milgram and Yaron Lishchinsky weren't martyrs. They were planners. Dreamers. People in love with the work and with each other. They weren't supposed to be names in a headline, but they are. And now, we have to ask why. Before the shooting. Before the politics. Before the label. He was just a boy. Born on the south side of Chicago. Raised between sermons and shouting. In a city where lines were drawn in invisible ink. And crossed every day. Elias Rodriguez was born in 1994. His mother, a second-generation Puerto Rican immigrant, a nurse and the unofficial activist of the bloc. His father, a union electrician raised on strikes and scriptures. Together they believed in community and conflict resolution. But their dinner table was never silent. Politics was the second language in their home. And Elias, their only child, learned to speak it young. By middle school he was quoting Malcolm X and dissecting city budgets. By high school he was already organizing. Teachers described him as bright, intense, opinionated. A boy who questioned everything. Who stayed after class to argue policy with his civics teacher. Who once walked out of school in protest of cafeteria labor practices. By college, Elias had transformed from student to organizer. Not just attending rallies, leading them. Housing injustice. Police brutality. Education inequality. His voice echoed through city halls, library auditoriums, live streams. He believed in direct action. But not in destruction. Not yet. But as the world spun, so did Elias. He watched the footage from Gaza. Listened to stories of bombings, families torn apart. And slowly, a new obsession emerged. The transition was gradual. From hashtags to headlines. From reading articles, to following accounts. From questioning policy, to condemning entire populations. He wasn't alone. The algorithm made sure of that. Each click led deeper into the current. Where rage, pain, and tribal allegiance fermented into something else. Elias's activism was no longer local. It became global and personal. He was arrested twice in 2019. Once for disorderly conduct at a congressional sit-in. Once for chaining himself to the gate of a defense contractor. Neither charge stuck. But something else did. A sense that peaceful protest was no longer enough. He told a local radio host, "If our voices don't move the needle, what will?" A line lost in a late-night segment. But maybe a glimpse into what was coming. Because here's the twist. Elias Rodriguez didn't always believe in violence. In fact, he rejected it. In 2015, he spoke to a youth group in Chicago and said, "You can't destroy what you're trying to build." So what happened? What made a once hopeful bridge builder turn to a gun? Maybe it wasn't one moment. Maybe it was a slow erosion. 1,000 small cuts. 1,000 perceived betrayals. 1,000 hours in online echo chambers where fire felt like the only answer. In the months before the shooting, Elias grew quieter. Friends said he seemed distant, agitated, unreachable. He wrote less, spoke less, but consumed more. Consumed anger. Consumed war footage. Consumed justification. By the time he bought the gun, no one knew what he truly believed anymore. Not his friends. Not his parents. Maybe not even himself. Elias Rodriguez was not born violent. He was born watching. Born absorbing. Born with a fire that once sought justice. But somewhere along the line, that fire turned, burnt, and took others with it. The Elias Rodriguez who gave that 2015 speech, who spoke of unity, peace, nonviolence, he's gone now. And in his place? A man who believed his cause justified the crossfire. The week began like any other. Sunlight on embassy walls. Suit jackets pressed and smiling diplomats rehearsing lines for a museum fundraiser. But beneath that calm, in inboxes, in encrypted forums, in algorithmic corridors few ever see, a different story was taking shape. May 2025. The images from Gaza were unrelenting. A hospital in ruins. A child under rubble. Tensions flared globally and Washington, D.C. felt it in every square. Embassies tightened security. Protests swelled outside consulates. And the world seemed like it was tipping. The Israeli embassy began issuing talking points. Staff were advised to avoid unnecessary exposure. But diplomacy doesn't pause for danger. Sarah and Yaron, young, ambitious, beloved, were tasked with representing hope. At an upcoming arts event hosted by the DC History Museum. They didn't seem nervous. Just busy. Sarah posted a selfie 2 nights before. Another long night at the embassy, worth it. Camera with flash, she's smiling. Tired, but radiant. Yaron sent a voice memo to a friend. "We're getting close to announcing something big. I'll tell you soon." Engagement rumors buzzed again. That same week, Elias Rodriguez went dark. Publicly at least. No Instagram stories. No protest flyers. No live stream rants. But his private activity told another story. Forum logs later recovered under subpoena showed a flurry of activity, searches for Israeli diplomats in D.C. Embassy Museum events May 24th. Security protocols D.C. Museum Gala. He posted on an encrypted board the night before. Symbolism matters more than bodies. The message will carry further. Investigators would later uncover a crude, disjointed manifesto-style post, shared in a fringe chat room days prior. It ranted about occupation and justice, but also drifted into contradictions. Philosophies of sacrifice, revenge, even redemption. It was part doctrine, part diary, and unmistakably unhinged. Friday, May 24th. The museum event was small, less than 60 guests. Light wine. Abstract art. A violin trio in the corner. Sarah introduced the exhibit. Yaron mingled, shook hands. They weren't high-level speakers. They weren't the target. Or were they? Because at 7:48 p.m., Elias stepped inside. He wasn't on the guest list. He didn't flash credentials. He simply walked past security. In a crowd of latecomers, head down, hands buried in his coat. The next 18 minutes are a blur. Camera angles miss key corners. Audio is muffled. But what's clear is this. Sarah and Yaron were not part of the exhibit Elias marked in his online notes. They weren't scheduled speakers. They weren't listed in the program. They were simply present. Wrong time. Wrong room. Wrong target? Elias didn't run. He didn't fight. He surrendered as if it was all inevitable. Like the chaos was the point. In his coat pocket, they found a folded printout of the gala flyer. On it, one name was circled. Not Sarah. Not Yaron. Another diplomat who had left 15 minutes earlier. So, was this personal? Or symbolic? Was it intentional murder? Or accidental martyrdom for a twisted cause? We may never know. Because the man who held the answers stopped speaking the moment the cuffs clicked shut. May 21, 2025, dawned like any other day in the nation's capital, a canvas of soft light and sober promise. Before the chaos, before the shattering sound of gunfire, lives moved in their silent routines. In a modest apartment not far from the embassy district, Sarah Milgram and Yaron Leszczynski began their morning. Sarah prepared for work with the care of someone who cherished every detail. A quiet smile as she sipped her coffee, a glance at a neatly framed photograph of brighter days. Yaron, already dressed in his crisp suit, reviewed the day's briefing, his calm determination evident in every measured step. Elsewhere in the city, in a modest but busy apartment on the south side of Chicago turned temporary refuge in D.C., Elias Rodriguez awoke before sunrise. His morning, unlike that of his intended victims, was solitary and methodical. He reviewed the news on his phone. Dispassion mingled with purpose in his eyes as he silently scanned headlines, a ritual that carried foreboding promise. By mid-morning, routine turned to expectation. The Israeli embassy, where Sarah and Yaron labored with hope, prepared for an event at the nearby Cultural History Museum, an evening affair meant to celebrate diversity and connection. Security protocols tightened, officials adjusted their collars, and every attendee felt the subtle pressure of diplomatic responsibility. Not far away, the digital trails of Elias Rodriguez began to intensify. His final messages on social media were terse and cryptic, his private chats laced with references to a cause that had moved from abstract protest to visceral anger. In an encrypted forum, amid heated discussions about policy and justice, a single post hinted at a planned message that no one would later dismiss as ordinary. As the afternoon matured, the museum's grand hall prepared to host what was meant to be a celebration. Sarah greeted guests with her customary grace, while Yaron circulated among the diplomats and cultural figures, each handshake and smile a deliberate affirmation of hope amid a frayed world. Inside the hall, gentle music played. Soft lights curved over modern art installations. For a brief moment, there was harmony, a brief suspension of the global conflicts that brewed unseen around every corner of the world. Yet unknown to most, not every attendee had come for the art. Some came fueled by a different message, one written not on invitations but in furious digital text and whispered ideology. Then in a heartbeat, normalcy shattered. At approximately 7:48 p.m., as the celebration unfolded, an echo of violence intruded. Witnesses recount that in an instant, a split second stretched into an eternity, what was seen and heard defied all expectation. Elias, whose arrival had been quietly noted by the security system, moved with a calm that belied the carnage about to be unleashed. In his hand, he clutched a weapon, a tool as cold as the conviction that its user believed justified. It wasn't a spectacle of raw, uncontrolled fury. It was a measured act. Eyewitnesses recall how the silence inside the gallery fractured into chaos. Glances turned to shock. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Then the sound, a sharp, echoing report. And then another, several, the dissonant symphony of violence. Security cameras captured it all. Brief flashes of movement. The unmistakable slide of a weapon's arc. And between these cuts, a bystander's phone, recording what they thought was ambient noise in a bustling exhibition hall. The attack was calculated. Elias's demeanor remained unervingly calm as he moved through the space. There was no hysterical cry, no frantic retreat. He walked, almost serenely as if fulfilling a long-prepared ritual. In the flash of a few intense moments, lives were irrevocably altered. The victims, Sarah and Yaron, were caught in a swirl of confusion. Their final moments, recounted by those who witnessed from afar, were marked by shock and disbelief. A hand reaching out, a look of regret, or was it resignation? It is something only those in that room can truly recall. What remains carved in the memories of those who survived is a series of fragmented moments. The stutter of a heartbeat as an echo of the shot reverberated off the museum's walls. A series of muffled voices pleading in terror, and the unmistakable crackling of audio, recorded unwittingly on a bystander's device. In the aftermath, as echoing sirens filled the night, every detail was captured, except the answers. Police scoured the digital evidence. Security footage from every available angle, geolocation data tracing Elias's path through the building, eyewitness testimonies that repeated in overlapping fragments of disbelief. Among them, the bystander's recording emerged as a chilling twist. What was meant to be ambient background captured in everyday sound turned out to be an unintentional witness. A raw, unedited audio record of the critical moments. Experts later noted that the faint background of panicked breaths, overlapping voices, and a singular, stark audio crack in the chaos might hold clues that security cameras missed. The timeline is now a mosaic of evidence. Fragmented images, shredded footage, and hushed, whispered testimonies. It paints a picture as jarring as it is incomplete. Who was Elias that day? What drove him to this chilling act? And how did Sarah and Yaron find themselves caught in a moment not of their choosing? As the day surrendered to night, the full gravity of what had transpired began to sink in. Shock gave way to a desperate need for answers, a need that grew louder with each passing minute in the days that followed. The timeline of May 21, 2025, became both a record and a mystery, a chronology of lives in motion, caught in the split second of fate. And in that split second, a single bystander's recording would raise as many questions as it answered. Tonight, as the sirens fade and the murmurs of inquiry take over the city's hush, we are left with echoes, a series of fragmented moments that demand to be understood. This was the day when ideology met fate, when calculated calm turned to irreversible tragedy, and when the ordinary morning routines of Sarah and Yaron were forever altered by a man's unwavering conviction. The recording of that day, accidental yet profound, whispers secrets in the silence. It reminds us that even as the timeline is replayed across screens and speakers, some details remain hidden, waiting for us to uncover the full story. May 21, 2025, 8:14 a.m. The scene is frozen in time. 3 lives lost. A city gasping. Sirens flood the air like a warning too late. And amid the chaos, stands Elias Rodriguez. Not running. Not hiding. Not shouting. Just standing quietly, near the shattered remains of what he's done. A body camera would later show the first words out of his mouth. I did it for Palestine. I did it for Gaza. There were no questions before those words. No prompting. Just a declaration. A justification. To Elias, perhaps even a belief that this would explain everything. But nothing explains this. At the 63rd precinct, Elias was taken into custody. The interrogation room was cold, whitewashed, and silent, until he spoke. He was calm. Flat. Not defiant. Not remorseful. Just certain. He repeated the same phrase. They needed to know how it feels. They needed to pay attention. This was for the children in Gaza. Officers noted that he showed no confusion, no signs of drug use or mental disassociation. He was present, lucid, even polite. But what simmered underneath was harder to define. The state moved quickly to order a psychological evaluation. Was Elias insane? Delusional? A manipulated pawn? Or was this ideology plain and purposeful? The report was nuanced. He was not found psychotic, not legally insane, but he was deeply radicalized. According to forensic psychologist Dr. Hani Mirza, Elias had developed what is called a fixed ideological delusion. Not a delusion in the traditional psychiatric sense, but a hardened worldview fused with resentment, pain, and self-righteous purpose. He had become consumed by conflict he had never physically been part of. Yet, he believed he was at war. Online, Elias was active, very active. His digital footprint spanned encrypted message boards, anonymous forums, and fringe political subreddits. In the months leading up to the shooting, his posts had turned from passionate, to personal, to militant. A slow burn toward one irreversible act. He wasn't trained. He wasn't part of an organization. But he was angry. And he believed he had found a moral reason to act, no matter the cost. As news of Elias's arrest broke, the city divided, along lines invisible but deeply felt. Some voices emerged cautiously, expressing understanding of the pain behind his motive, but condemning his actions entirely. Others were less careful. Some tried to paint him as a martyr, a misguided soldier in a larger war. Meanwhile, the Jewish community mourned and feared. Synagogues hired additional security. Community centers installed panic buttons. Children asked their parents questions they weren't ready to answer. The ADL reported a 17% spike in reported anti-Semitic threats and harassment in the week following the attack. It wasn't just about Elias. It was about what he had awakened and what might come next. Then, another revelation. One that deepened the wound. A federal source confirmed anonymously to reporters that Elias had previously been flagged. Back in March, just 2 months earlier, a tip had been submitted. A former high school teacher had noted disturbing shifts in Elias's behavior. His essays, his social media activity, his withdrawal from peers. The warning was logged. But it never reached any threat threshold. No follow-up. No visit. Elias Rodriguez fell through a crack wide enough for tragedy to slip through. And now the question looms. Was this preventable? May 22, 2025. Less than 24 hours after the shooting. Before the victims had even been laid to rest. The machinery of justice was already in motion. The case didn't just stay local. It couldn't. This wasn't just a double homicide. It was something else. Something that would trigger international protocols. Sarah Milgram and Yaron Leszczynski weren't just civilians. They were foreign officials. Diplomatic staff under international protection. And now, they were gone, killed in the heart of the capital. This wasn't just murder. It was a message, whether intended or not. And it made this a matter for the federal government. By noon the next day, the FBI had executed a federal search warrant on Elias Rodriguez's apartment in southeast Chicago. What they found painted a troubling picture. Laptops. Hard drives. A burner phone. A notebook filled with hand-drawn flags, timelines, and phrases in Arabic. Many copied directly from protest banners, others taken from extremist web boards. But the most chilling? A series of drafts. Written documents formatted like manifestos. Unpublished, unsent, but steeped in anger. Page after page, a personal narrative twisted into political justification. The Bureau's cybersecurity unit launched a digital forensics operation. The goal? Track Elias's digital life, from encrypted chat rooms to fringe platforms buried deep in the web's underlayer. It didn't take long. Elias had no known ties to organized terror groups. He never left the country. Never trained with a militia. Never crossed into flagged communication networks. But he didn't need to. What investigators discovered instead was a rabbit hole of ideology. He didn't speak with leaders. He followed hashtags. On May 25th, U.S. Attorney General Diane Calhoun stepped to the podium at the Department of Justice. She laid it out charge by charge. It wasn't just about what he did. It was about why. And that why would define the direction of the entire trial. Behind closed doors, prosecutors debated a high-stakes question. Should they pursue the death penalty? It hadn't been used in Washington, D.C. since 1957. But under federal law it was on the table. The victims were diplomatic staff. The killing was premeditated. The motive, politically charged. Some viewed it as an act of terror. Others, an act of hate. But which was it? That distinction would ripple through media, communities, even Capitol Hill. On one side of the aisle, calls to charge Elias under hate crime statutes, asserting that he targeted Sarah and Yaron based on ethnicity, nationality, and perceived religion. On the other, voices urging the case to be framed as political extremism, warning against blurring ideological critique with racial hatred. But what if it was both? Some argued that Elias's motive was so entangled in identity politics, nationalism, and social justice narratives that no single label fit cleanly. Others feared that focusing too much on motive might give it credibility. But in the courtroom, nuance becomes strategy. Intent becomes leverage. And for the prosecution, the stakes had never been higher. When a life is taken, the loss ripples outward. When 2 lives are taken in the capital of a global superpower, the waves become shock. This wasn't just a crime in Washington, D.C. It became a tremor in the fragile balance of diplomacy. The first international response came from the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A prepared statement delivered at dawn. We are devastated by the brutal killing of 2 members of our diplomatic family. We await swift justice, and we will not be silent in the face of such violence. Candles were lit across Jerusalem. Flags lowered to half-staff. And in Tel Aviv, the embassy was flooded with flowers, letters, and grief. But this wasn't just national mourning. It was geopolitical tension. Across the border, responses differed. Some voices in Palestinian civil society condemned the violence outright. Others expressed cautious silence. And some radical corners praised the act. Though their numbers were small, the internet amplified their volume. It was a signal that this tragedy wasn't unfolding in a vacuum. In Washington, unity, however rare, was momentarily achieved. From both sides of the aisle came sorrow and outrage. The president called it a cowardly act of terror. The Speaker of the House labeled it a diplomatic disaster and a hate crime rolled into one. And one senior senator warned, "We are standing on a precipice." Violence like this pulls threads that keep peace from unraveling. Some called for increased embassy protections. Others called for deeper scrutiny of domestic radicalization. But beneath the sound bites, a quieter question was growing louder. How did we miss this? Behind closed doors, U.S. diplomats scrambled to assure Israeli officials. This was not state-sanctioned. This was not preventable. We will hold him accountable. But words can't rewind time. And trust, when shaken, takes time to restore. Private briefings were held. Phone calls stretched late into the night. And in at least 3 countries, U.S. embassies received credible threats in the days that followed. The attack wasn't seen as part of an international plot. But its symbolic impact was unmistakable. Within 48 hours, the State Department ordered. Flags were guarded more closely. Routine events were reconsidered. And every security officer was told to reread the manual, just in case. Publicly, most leaders condemned the act. Privately, trust fractured. Israeli officials began requesting new terms for diplomatic protection of their staff in allied countries. U.S. ambassadors abroad faced uncomfortable questions from allies and adversaries alike. Is your political unrest becoming a threat to ours? And perhaps most telling, in Gaza, West Bank, and even parts of Jordan, the case of Elias Rodriguez became a symbol. But of what? Depended on who was watching. In Washington, D.C., the flags flew half-mast. But the silence felt heavier than ceremony. A city that had grown numb to daily headlines of conflict found itself staring at the cost of violence, not from overseas but at home. Memorials formed at the National Mall. Diplomats from over 40 countries signed condolence books. And in the crowd, some stood in prayer. Others in protest. The nation hadn't just lost 2 foreign envoys. It had gained a mirror. And the reflection was complicated. In the wake of tragedy, memory becomes a battleground. How do we honor those taken too soon? How do we channel grief into something lasting? For Sarah Milgram and Yaron Leszczynski, their story does not end at the crime scene. It lives on, in the hearts of their families, their friends, and the communities they touched. In the months following the shooting, foundations sprang up bearing their names. The Sarah Milgram Foundation aims to raise awareness about anti-Semitism and foster dialogue between communities. The Yaron Leszczynski Memorial Fund supports diplomatic families affected by violence worldwide. Together they stand as a bulwark against forgetting. Sarah and Yaron's deaths became a rallying cry, not only against hate crimes, but against the rising tide of political violence. Advocates, lawmakers, and ordinary citizens joined calls to improve protections for diplomatic personnel, increase education on anti-Semitism and cultural understanding, address the root causes of radicalization both online and offline. Their families spoke at rallies, met with leaders, and shared their pain publicly, hoping their voices might prevent another tragedy. They asked the world to see Sarah and Yaron not just as victims, but as vibrant, hopeful individuals. Sarah, whose laughter lit up a room, whose passion for peace shaped her every step. Yaron, a devoted diplomat who believed in building bridges across divides. Their legacy is a plea. Remember us as we were. As more than headlines. As a reminder that peace is fragile. And that violence leaves scars far beyond the bullet. The story of Sarah and Yaron is a warning, and a beacon. We cannot turn away from the difficult conversations their deaths demand. We must confront hate with understanding. We must protect those who carry diplomacy's torch. And we must choose empathy over division. Their legacy asks you, the viewer, to listen, to learn, and to act. Because in remembrance there is hope. If this story moved you, if it made you think or feel or reflect, Don't let it fade away into silence or the endless scroll of the algorithm. Every share, every like, every subscription keeps Sarah and Yaron's memory alive. But beyond clicks, this is a call to action. Speak out against hate. Speak out against violence. In every form, in every community. Because silence allows hatred to grow. Your voice, your choice, can help stop the next tragedy before it happens. Thank you for watching. Remember their names. Remember their lives. And help us build a world where stories like theirs no longer happen.